My name is Charles Swanson. It's July the 29th, 2022, and I am here this morning to interview Howard Vogel for the Legal History Project of the Knoxville Bar Association. Please tell us your full name and the date of your birth.
Charles, a point of personal privilege. Before we get started, I'd like to say something if I can have your permission to do that.
Your permission is granted, but you frighten me.
I don't intend to frighten you. I intend to thank you. I'd like to thank the Knoxville Bar Association for the invitation for this interview today. When I was contacted, I was told that I could pick an interviewer, and my immediate thought was, heck, that's easy. It's a short list. There's only one name on it, Charles Swanson. Under other circumstances, the name would have been the Honorable Judge Pam Reeves. You two mean so much to so many, including me, and I thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you, Howard. That's very meaningful to me, and I appreciate your kind words. But we want to talk about you today.
Let's keep it about you.
As we talk about you, one of the first questions I want to ask you, other than your name and your date of birth, which you very confidently avoided there. So tell us your date of birth, Howard.
Charles, I was born on September 4, 1949 in Paris, Tennessee, and I was later told that it was a very hot day.
And are you married?
I am. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Lynn, who's also a UT law graduate. We met in law school. We have 3 wonderful children. One of those children is my law partner, Alex. The older child is Caroline, and she's an Episcopal minister. And the youngest is Anna Catherine. We call her AK, and she's a professional photographer. And I often say, AK may be the happiest child I have. And we have 7 grandchildren.
So it's interesting that one of your law partners is your son. How is that? How does that work out in the office politics?
Politics, it's okay. Fortunately, I'm able to say with great pride that Alex does a good job being a lawyer, and he was a pretty quick study. I think the reason for that was his history of athletics. He's always been a competitor from the time he was a little kid. He fits in well. From my standpoint, it is a great blessing to see him just walking up and down the hall. And I'm thankful for that.
So you have a daughter who is an Episcopal priest, and are you a person who attends her church on a regular basis, or do you save her from that pressure?
Well, it's not a simple answer. We do occasionally go to her church, but we are registered at another one. And we go when we understand she's going to preach. She's quite good at that. And my early thoughts after she graduated from college were sort of focused upon her becoming a lawyer, and she helped me better understand that there were other ways in which she could serve humanity. And she made the right choice.
Wonderful. So you say you have 7 grandchildren?
Yes.
Can you tell me their ages?
I could give you the oldest and the youngest, and then we'll have to bring Lynn in to fill in. But the youngest is 3, and the oldest is 15.
All right. So probably sometime in the distant future, your children will pull out this tape and watch their grandfather as he is interviewed. And as they watch, I need you to tell me which of those 7 is your favorite.
I anticipated that question, Charles, because I've known you for a long time, and I'm sure there will be more like it, more curveballs, and I'll attempt to hit every one of them. I love them all for different reasons. And the wonder of grandchildren is that their little personalities are uniquely different, even brother to brother, cousin to cousin. I'm very fortunate, and Lynn and I talk about this all the time. They all get along so well. Cousins loving cousins. It's a wonderful thing to watch.
So you tell us that you were born in Paris. Did you grow up in West Tennessee as well?
I did.
And I have assumed that Paris means Paris, Tennessee, as opposed to Paris, France.
That is the correct assumption, and I'm asked that question, have been all my life as I ventured away from West Tennessee. Spent a lot of time in Paris. Still have cousins in Paris. My family had a business there, and my father, my grandfather, and two of my uncles, one of my cousins worked for the family business, and so we were very much oriented to Paris, Tennessee, and Henry County.
So what sort of business was it?
It was a ball clay strip mining business. At one point, West Tennessee was known to have the world's largest deposits of ball clay. Ball clay is the type of clay that's used to make a lot of tile, bathroom equipment like toilets. The chances are that if you ever, and everyone does, you may have at one point been seated on something made from ball clay from West Tennessee.
So, did you go through high school in Paris?
Yes, I attended E.W. Grove High School, and there's a little story about that school, if I can tell it.
Please do.
It's named for Mr. Grove, and Mr. Grove was a Paris businessman who made what they used to call elixirs, and his most famous one was Grove's Chill Tonic. He gave the land, they built the high school, and as a result of calling it Grove High School, the nickname for the sports teams was the Grove Chill Tonics. Elixirs kind of went.
Was that the official name?
That was the official name. They later became the Blue Devils, and they were the Blue Devils when I played football there.
I see. The Chill Tonics is an outstanding name.
Well, it was. There's some question about what the contents of the Chill Tonic actually were. Mr. Grove went on to take his business from Paris, Tennessee to St. Louis, and it became Grove Laboratories, which is a known pharmaceutical company.
So, you were essentially a small-town West Tennessee young man as you grew up and went through high school.
I still am.
Do you think that growing up in West Tennessee played a particular role in the person you were later to become as an adult?
I think so. I cherish the thought of my upbringing, how I was raised by my family, a lot of loving nurturing. I had good sports coaches. I had good friends. It was actually, two of my classmates had lawyers who were, daddies who were lawyers, and I got to sort of listen in sometimes to what they were doing, and my interest in becoming a lawyer essentially came from that. I wanted to help people like Fred McLean's father was helping people, and it meant something to me, and I think that's what then began my chart that ultimately caused me to arrive here in Knoxville.
So I was going to ask you if you had lawyers in your family who you emulated.
I have a great-grandfather who was a lawyer in Cincinnati, and he was at that time, your diploma entitled you to practice, and I have his diploma hanging on the wall of my office.
So after you finished your time with the Chill Tonics, where did you go to undergraduate school?
Went to Vanderbilt. Grove High School, they used to say, was supposed to send at least one kid every year. So I guess that was me. But I did enjoy it. Made wonderful friends, and I think got a pretty good education.
What was your major at Vanderbilt?
Philosophy.
Interesting. Was there anything about your experience, your years at Vanderbilt, which you believe was particularly transformative for you?
I think that a college education is extraordinarily important for many reasons, and it's not just what happens in the classrooms. I enjoyed the courses. I took a lot of Southern literature courses. The agrarian writing movement was related to Vanderbilt many years ago, so it was that culture in English literature, particularly Southern literature, was very, very rich there. My faculty advisor for my major was Dr. John Locks, and he was the best professor I ever had. And you were supposed to go spend time with your faculty advisor occasionally. It was always a treat for me. The man was funny, intelligent, and a philosopher himself. I think the other thing was I really enjoyed meeting kids from all over the country and formed some great friendships. And I think the process of the education over 4 years was almost as important as any class that I took. It was a good experience. College is supposed to help us form, and for me, I hope it worked. I think it did.
So is there anything that you can think of other than your experience in listening to your friends' fathers who were lawyers talk about the law and what they were doing in the law and things of that nature? You have now completed or about to complete your education at Vanderbilt, and you're going to have to figure out what's next. How do you decide I'm going to law school as opposed to pursuing a degree in philosophy and becoming an academic?
My father always encouraged me to do what I wanted to do, and in my family, a sense of independence was something that all of us should have, and we were encouraged to be independent thinkers. Of course, there was the option to go back and dig clay in West Tennessee. That certainly was an option. But having had the experience of sitting on a bulldozer in the snow in a strip mine helped me realize that there was something else I might want to do. And law school seemed to be the course that I should take. And there is a person from my high school days who was also part of that reason for looking at law school, and it was my speech teacher. Her name was Ruby Kreider. She had a national, even though she was from Paris, Tennessee, she had a national reputation for training high school debaters. I went to a high school debate tournament in Washington, D.C. my sophomore year. It was a big thing. And Miss Ruby taught us how to stand up in front of people and look them in the eye and talk to them without fainting. And so she prepared me to look forward to some form of public speaking. The law seemed like the natural place to take that.
Did you ever get an opportunity to talk with Miss Ruby about pursuing a career in law?
No, after she launched you were pretty much on your way. Her daughter is a practicing lawyer in Nashville, and over the years since Miss Ruby passed, occasionally I have spoken with her about the blessing of her mother on me.
So once you decided that law school was the thing for you, where'd you go?
Came up here to UT. Again, a very easy decision. A bunch of my fraternity brothers, whom you know, were all coming up here, maybe not with me. Well, actually, I took a year off to dig clay and gather a little bit of money so that would help with going to law school.
This year they call that a gap year.
That's what it was. For me, it was a strip mine year. But when I arrived, Bill Young was arriving, and the Campbell boys from Chattanooga were also arriving. And so we had all been discussing where we were going. The reason I chose Tennessee, obviously there are other law schools, but I knew I wanted to practice in the state, and I knew that I probably wanted to get to know a large number of lawyers with whom I would be practicing, and that seemed like a reasonable thing to do.
At the University of Tennessee, you were in the class of?
I guess 74.
All right. Were you one of those people who enjoyed going to law school?
There's the next curveball question. Yes, for the most part. But I was given some very good advice on the front end by someone who was fixing to graduate, who was also from West Tennessee. And Tommy said, Howard, the most important thing that happens to you in connection with your law school education is graduation. And what you must do, if you want, is pay attention, get it done, get out, and get into the real world of law practice. So I took him at his word, and we were on the quarter system then. I went all the way through.
So you said that advice came from Tommy, but you didn't give us any more information about Tommy. Who's Tommy?
Tommy Heron. Tommy was from Mackenzie. He married a girl from Paris. That's how I got to know Tommy. And I think Tommy went on to practice law in Jackson, Tennessee, I think. Sort of lost track of time. In fact, I think he's deceased. But it was good advice, and I'm glad I followed it. His other piece of advice was study the professors. They will let you know, not directly, but they will let you know what they expect of you. When it comes time to exams, you study the professor and you'll be just fine. He was right about that too.
Are there any professors that you remember from your career at the University of Tennessee who you found to be particularly memorable?
Yes. Of course, anyone from that era would say Dr. Overton, and I would put him on the list.
When you say Dr. Overton, is that E.E. Overton?
It is E.E. Overton.
All right.
Fred Tomford, I thought, was a very good professor. He was full of energy and joy about teaching us, and he was very effective at it. I loved Joe Cook. His con law courses were outstanding. He was very serious, very, very intelligent. He was exceptionally good. But there were others as well. But any list, if it's my list, would include Don Payne. Don, obviously in practice, but he would still take time to come teach us about the law, and developed great admiration for him, I guess day one, in his first course that I took.
How long did it take you to become a real friend of Don Payne, which I know you were?
Yeah, I probably will be mentioning Don a couple more times during the interview. Not long. He had this rare, wonderful, engaging personality, and of course he was so well spoken and such a good lawyer, and he was talking about the real thing, and capturing our interest was the easiest thing for him to do, and he did it extraordinarily well.
You mentioned Dr. Overton as one of your memorable professors. Did you, as I do, have the memory of Dr. Overton doing a little soft shoe shuffle during his experience in teaching you?
Oh yes, and I'm trying to remember if it's only a myth or whether I was present, but it was reported that he got up on a table in front of a class and did something very similar. But it's a little hazy.
I can confirm that as true. As an observer of him getting up on the table and doing a soft shoe. I am told that he actually had a career in what was soft shoe was a part of the Vaudeville.
Is that right?
I am told that E.E. Overton actually performed in vaudeville for a brief period of time. Now, I have not confirmed whether or not that's true, but it's sure something interesting.
I wish I had known that, Charles, because I would have included it in one of my flaw review columns that I wrote for the newsletter.
Now, tell me about the flaw review.
It was a way for me to express myself and demonstrate a little bit of a sense of humor, and I would pick on people a little bit, but they seemed to enjoy it. And the people would immediately, I can't remember if it was released on Friday, but people would go get it to read my flaw review column. And it was one of those flaw review columns that actually resulted in a very interesting conversation that I had many years after that with a lawyer from North Carolina. Did you ever have Doug Wickham as one of your professors?
I did.
I gave him the nickname Fog. and it was in one of my law review columns. Many years later, I'm talking to one of my Raleigh, North Carolina friends who's a lawyer, and he said, do you know Fog, do you know Doug Wickham? And I said, well, sure, he was one of my professors. And he said, is it true that his nickname was Fog? And I said, well, yeah, I can confirm that one because I gave it to him. And of course he laughed. And I think Doug still laughs about it too, but I hope so anyway.
No, I hope so. So there was a weekly newsletter at the law school when you were there?
Mm-hmm.
They worked us too hard for anybody to have time to do a weekly newsletter. So I'm sad that I missed that.
It was a lot of fun.
Were you the editor of the Flaw Review?
Well, yes. Ironically, Dean Penniger signed a certificate honoring my service as editor of the Flaw Review when I graduated, which, of course, was unnecessary, but funny as well.
So you finished law school about 74, and what was next for you following your completion of law school?
I actually, after passing the bar exam that spring, I opened my own law office, and as a solo practitioner, I thought that was a good idea, and I set about doing that and had some interesting experiences. At that point, Don Payne was a friend, so he was sort of a mentor for my emerging practice, and several other local lawyers were as well. And then that fall, the fall of 1975, Ben Williamson arrives at my door at my office and asked me to go to lunch. We had lunch, and he said, would you like to join our law firm? And I said yes. And so I became a member of O'Neill, Parker, and Williamson on January 1, 1976. And I'm still there.
So you were a solo practitioner for the better part of a year.
Well, about half a year.
All right. Did you have any interesting experiences as a solo practitioner?
Yes, I did. One that I will never forget. A young lady called and wanted to schedule an appointment with me, and we scheduled the appointment, and she came in, and we went through the intake interview, and she wanted to get a divorce. And she said her husband is not going to contest it, and just get me a divorce. And I said, okay, fine. So I began preparing the complaint, and it was either the next day or the day after, I get a call from secretary for a very prominent Knoxville lawyer, Ray Jenkins. And Ray's
The Terror of Tellico Plains.
The Terror of Tellico Plains, a wonderful book. And a lawyer with an amazing history of service to the public. But his secretary was very kind. She said, Mr. Jenkins will be representing Mr. So-and-so in the divorce that we understand you're fixing to file, and he would like to meet with you. Can we find a time on your calendar in order to make that happen? And I'm thinking, well, look at my calendar. That's easy. I said, well, yes. Let me open it up here. So we found the time, and she said, you need to set aside at least 2 hours. And I thought, oh my God, why 2 hours? What else is going on here that my client did not tell me about? And so I said, okay, fine. So the day came, I walked over to the Bank of Knoxville building, go up the elevator to his office. Secretary comes out and says, I'll take you to Mr. Jenkins now. And I'm thinking, well, I'm a young lawyer, I haven't been in practice very long. I'm too young to die. This is either going to be memorable or the worst day of my life, and perhaps memorable just for that. So go in, and Ray introduces himself and tells me, he didn't have to tell me anything about his history, he told me a little bit about him. He said, tell me a little bit about you. So we talked about Paris, Tennessee, talked about strip mines. And he said, I asked you here so that we could talk about Miss So-and-so's divorce. He said, there won't be any problem with the divorce. We'll just get it worked out. And he said, so we've completed our business, but would you like to stay a while and hear some stories? And I thought, man, I am getting the world's greatest dividend here? And I said, yes, sir. So for the next hour, he recounted all these wonderful stories about other Knoxville lawyers, including George Montgomery, who used to live about a half a mile to my left. It was fantastic. I smiled all the way back to my office. It was a wonderful experience.
Sounds wonderful. I congratulate you on having had that opportunity. So, about a half a year into your practice, then you become a part of what became the O'Neill, Parker, and Williamson law firm. And you practiced with Ben Williamson. And I will have to say that when I was a very young lawyer, Ben Williamson sort of terrified me. He had a reputation as being a little bit crusty, and having had a case or two with him, I found him to be a little bit crusty. I wonder what your experience with him was like. Was he different in the office, or was that just Ben?
Third curveball.
Third curveball.
Ben, Mr. O'Neill, Mr. Parker, Mr. Williamson were all extraordinary lawyers, but each had a personality different from the other two. One of the interesting things that I learned about that experience was you can put together a law firm with very different personalities and they can function together. But there were times when Ben was truly a challenge, and we would watch him be crusty, particularly with young lawyers. Ben once said that he thought it was part of his professional responsibility to, in the practice setting, help train and develop young lawyers. And so he thought it was part of his method to help lawyers in opposition to him, if they were young, learn how to react to a personality like his. There was really something that he had in mind behind the crustiness.
I must say he fulfilled that responsibility to me.
Many say that. But Ben, although perhaps Ben wanted no one to know this, he had a gigantic heart. And let me tell a Ben Williamson story. It is a story about the end of his days. Ben did not want to stop practicing law. He did not want to retire. Mr. Parker, Mr. O'Neill had both retired. Mr. Parker simply because he wanted to work on his farm. Mr. O'Neill because he had some health issues. But Ben wasn't going to quit. The Thursday before Ben passed away, he took a deposition in a plaintiff's case that he was handling. And during the deposition, he was on oxygen, wearing a cannula. And that was just Ben. I was out of town that weekend, got home Sunday morning, and his wife Martha called and said, "Howard, Ben wants you to come out to the house." And I said, well, sure. And she said, you really need to come on. Hospice is coming this afternoon, and he won't see them until he has spoken with you. So I raced out there, probably too fast, but she said, go on in there. And so he and I had just an extraordinarily pleasant but goodbye conversation. And so I stayed a little bit longer and talked to Martha and then left, and he died that night.
What an amazing experience.
He was a really good lawyer.
He was that. So, as you moved into your practice at O'Neill, Parker, and Williamson, what sort of law were you practicing? What were you doing?
The mainstay for OPW at that time was insurance defense work, and that's essentially what I did. I handled some plaintiffs' cases too, and we all did. That was another thing. Ben thought that if you were going to be a real courtroom lawyer, you had to be able to stand up for both sides. And I tend to agree with that.
So, in your experience at standing up for both sides, did you have any amusing experiences during that time?
Well, there was I'll share a couple of things. One involves me and one doesn't, but they both involve District Judge Robert Love Taylor. And lawyers from our era have plenty of Judge Taylor stories, and I have my own share. The one that involved me was I was trying a wrongful death case on behalf of the surviving husband, and Charlie Lewis was defending. And we tried it to verdict, but between opening statements and verdict, there was for those who tried cases in front of Judge Taylor, it was a unique experience because he was most anxious in having a speedy trial. And so he would force you to accelerate the testimony of your witnesses. I put on an economist, and he and I was establishing the credentials of the economist before we got to the opinion that he had reached. And Judge Taylor said, "You don't have to do that." And he turned to Dr. Mike Brookshire, who used to be here at UT, and he said, "Just tell him what she was worth." And everyone, everyone was just sort of shocked. Mike Brookshire was shocked. So we scrambled to get the proof out and did. It turned out okay, but it was an interesting experience. The one that didn't involve me, that is courtroom related, but involves Judge Taylor, is he had this practice of, as soon as your case was filed, you're supposed to show up for his version of a docket call. And he would give you a trial date, and it would be, unfortunately, too soon, but it didn't matter to him. So I was there for one, and a particular case was called. It was not my case, but I was just there for mine. But the case was, you remember that the intersection of I-75 and I-40 downtown used to be referred to as Malfunction Junction.
I do recall that.
Well, it was a Malfunction Junction motor vehicle accident case. And the defendant was actually a touring bus. The defendant was a country music band. They were in their touring bus, and somehow the accident happened. So the clerk calls the name of the case, and it was so-and-so versus the name of the country music group. The country music group is still out there, but the name of the group was Asleep at the Wheel. And Judge Taylor immediately said, I don't want to know how the accident happened. All of us sitting out there had to bite our lips into to keep from exploding with laughter, but it was a rare but pleasant moment.
So as time moved on, it's my belief that your practice of law developed and evolved into a large amount of mediation. Tell us how that came about.
It came about accidentally for this reason. My first mediation that I attended was in 1988 with a client, products liability case, lots of parties. Everybody in the case, including the insurance adjusters, had never been to a mediation. We couldn't find a Tennessee mediator, so we flew one in from Chicago. We had the mediation. Interesting, case didn't settle. It's over. Between then and when the Supreme Court put down Rule 31 in 1996, there was all this informal mediation stuff going on, and I had been to 45 or 50. Then we see...
When your grandchildren listen to this, they're not going to know what Rule 31 means. Tell us what Rule 31 is.
The way we worked our way into a mediation program in our state courts of Tennessee was that the Supreme Court decided that they needed to take a look, and they put together a committee to study the question of whether we needed a mediation program that they would essentially administer through a commission. Rule 31 became the order of the Supreme Court that established our civil justice mediation program, created the commission to follow it, created some guidelines for training, and a few rules, and that's what Rule 31 was. A footnote on that, we borrowed Florida's mediation program because in the South, they were the fastest to really put together a good one. So there was no reason to recreate the wheel. We borrowed Florida's, and it has worked for us too.
So you must have been one of the very earliest Rule 31 mediators in Knoxville or this area at all.
Well, there were a lot of us. I went to Nashville that summer to take a course that was taught by a Florida mediator. And there were 42, 43 of us. Lamar Alexander was there for part of it. We all thought that was interesting. He was between jobs. And, but it was catching on then. The reason I went was not to start mediating. I thought, okay, if we're gonna be doing this, if there's some secrets I can learn, that's what I'm here to get, and that'll make me a better lawyer for my clients on mediation day. And there weren't any secrets, but it was a nice experience. I got to meet lawyers that I had not met. Bill Ray from Johnson City is a perfect example.
So Bill Ray was an interesting personality in East Tennessee and such a fine lawyer. Did you ever work together with Bill Ray in any way?
Yeah. He mediated cases for me. I mediated cases for him. And we actually had joint defendants in some lawsuits that we were handling. I got to know Bill well. He was a good man.
At this point, about what percentage of your practice consists of mediation practice?
Today?
Today.
100%. And Charles, I actually, in the year 2000, I made the switch. I decided that I would not accept new client work and just turn that over to the rest of the firm and just devoted my professional time to this.
And what was your motivation for going to 100% mediation?
Well, Lynn told me that it would be nice if I could come home early a few nights, and no one should be expected to be a full-time lawyer for clients and a full-time mediator. So she said, figure it out and just make a choice. She said, I don't care which one you pick.
What do you find that you particularly enjoy about being a mediator?
I wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to help people. It's the same opportunity with this important difference. It happens in a short period of time. But when it works, the professional gratification is just as strong as it is when you can look a client in the eye and said, congratulations, you won.
If a young lawyer is watching this who aspires to be a successful mediator, what's the one thing you would tell that young lawyer needs to do?
Learn how to practice law.
And why is that important?
The parties in a mediation expect the mediator to be more than just the carrier of messages. I think they're looking for some degree of coaching, and that involves an extensive knowledge of the law and the subject matter relating to the dispute. So you have to have carried the load in order to explain it inside the context of a mediation. I could be wrong. I think it's possible for someone who learns the technique to accommodate on a case-by-case basis, but I think having experience gives a mediator an advantage.
Valuable not only to the mediator, but to the parties as well as they go through the process.
I agree.
Howard, you've been a lawyer now for the better part of 5 decades. What have your observations been about how the practice of law has evolved and developed over that time?
The thing I used to think about was the arrival of lawyer advertising and the effect that had on the profession. I guess I've kind of gotten used to that now, and so I don't look at those things on TV like I used to. That was important to me at the time. I thought it was going to degrade our professionals' reputation and status in our system. Maybe it did to a certain degree, but I think we have weathered that. I think our challenges now are more in the nature of an even more complex society with more types and forms of disputes, more need to specialize in certain areas. The role of the general practitioner it's always been a challenge. It is highly challenged now. And I think that the ability to recognize as a general practitioner when the assistance of a specialist is necessary is a very important thing for lawyers to remember. Another concern I have is that there is and it's not just among lawyers, it's with physicians and nurse practitioners as well. There is this interest in giving more discretion to a paralegal or a nurse practitioner to the point of permitting them to establish independent, unmonitored practices. There are, in the legal field, there are some experiments with that going on around the country now. Arizona is an example, and I'm trying to become acquainted with how they are approaching their pilot program because I think more of it is coming. I understand the why. The why is that the delivery of legal services is extraordinarily challenged, and we spend a lot of time trying to emphasize and promote the delivery of legal services more broadly. From the perspective of the public, from the perspective of the consumer, maybe for certain types of legal disputes, just going to a paralegal shop, just for certain types of medicine, going to a nurse practitioner shop is enough for what they need. But it is something for which there will be much debate and discussion going forward.
Some of the dangers of a person who is not fully trained in the law essentially offering legal advice are apparent. What to you, say you're in the country out where it's not a metropolitan area, and there are only 1 or 2 or 3 lawyers available in the county for people to come to, and the non-lawyers, the paralegals, become essentially the practitioners in that area. What danger does that present?
It depends upon how well educated that paralegal might be, but there is always the risk that in the delivery of that form of legal service, it is less than what is actually needed and necessary. They used to tell the story about small town lawyers that if a small town only has 1 lawyer, that lawyer will go bankrupt. So that lawyer has to recruit another lawyer to come to town, and maybe a couple more, so that they can work in opposition to one another and thrive. I believe that's true, by the way, and you and I both know a lot of lawyers who've done quite well in Paris, Tennessee, or Rogersville, or Athens, or Cleveland. It works.
So what have you observed as you look at the practice of law 50 years down the road? What have you observed that gives you the greatest cause for optimism about the legal profession?
There is still an interest among the young people to want to be lawyers. And as our last 4 or 5 years have demonstrated, there is increased need for good legal opinion to contribute to the important decisions of our society. So the need for lawyers will continue to grow.
Is the need for an analytic view of problems that exist? What is the need that is met more by lawyers than by those who are not trained in the law?
We are trained in the law, and as a result of that, we have our strong opinions about what law and order and legal process and due process really mean. For a lot of lay people, the notion of due process might have something to do with what they see on their flowers in the morning. It is important for the analytical, trained legal mind to be involved in pretty much everything that involves our society in this country.
So you have practiced your entire career in the Knoxville area, and you have told me about some of the heroes, some of the folks that you worked with in your own law firm, and some of the heroes that you've met. in the Knoxville Bar. Do you have one or two personal heroes that you haven't told us about who were members of the Knoxville Bar?
Foster Arnett is easily...
Tell us about Foster.
Foster was a very good lawyer, a true gentleman. I had the good fortune of interviewing him for the Tennessee Bar Foundation Legal History Project, and I have gone back to watch that video several times. His son Foster has thanked me repeatedly for interviewing his dad. I got a copy for him. He looks at it with great admiration, as do I. Foster was a perfect example for young lawyers. This is what a lawyer is supposed to do. This is what a lawyer is supposed to look like. Maybe not smoke cigars like he did, or a pipe, but he was a very, very good lawyer, a wonderful role model.
And what were those qualities that he both demonstrated and suggested that were important for lawyers to do to be both successful and useful?
Speak well, know your file. Realize that the presence of a lawyer is an important part of any gathering, and you have to respectfully understand the role that you play. And he was very, very, very good at that.
What's your middle name?
Harris.
And did Foster Arnett call you Howard Harris Vogel?
Every once in a while, yes.
He had a real habit of
did.
learning lawyers' middle names and using those middle names.
You're right.
Well, you have been extraordinarily active in your professional activities, which promote the legal profession. What and who motivated you to be so active in the legal activities?
Charles, I have a long history of feeling like if you're not willing to volunteer yourself to help others, whether that's as a professional or just as a volunteer with a not-for-profit or a legal organization, for me it was a necessity. And my first involvement with law and order was serving as captain of the safety patrol in the 6th grade. It kind of began there. And from that point on, I wanted to do what I could. And I must have a little bit of talent or capacity to formulate plans for how organizations can move forward. Some people call that leadership. I call it hard work. And I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Is there anyone who suggested to you that you should get involved in the Bar Association?
No. Mr. O'Neill and Mr. Parker had both been presidents of the Knoxville Bar, and it was kind of a natural thing for me. I had been president of my fraternity in college. It's a form of service that I had already enjoyed in different capacities. And it just joining the barristers locally and getting involved there was a natural thing to do.
You served as president of the barristers, which is
Yes.
a young lawyers group in Knoxville, and you also served as president of the statewide organization of young lawyers, which at that time was called the Tennessee Young Lawyers Conference. How did you find time, as you're a baby lawyer, how did you find time to build your law practice and also engage in those kinds of activities?
Well, I had some things were easier than others. I'm not a bass fisherman. My hobbies became devoted to voluntary participation in law-related organizations. And everybody needs a hobby. Kind of turned out to be mine. And I had the support of Lynn. Lynn could see the importance that I felt in trying to give back. And she has done local community volunteer work too. And so it's just kind of the way we think.
For those who have forgotten, Lynn, of course, is your sweet wife.
Yes.
All right. So for young lawyers coming into the practice today, there's a lot of focus on standard of living, a lot of focus on having a life outside of the law as well as practicing law. Would you encourage young lawyers to get involved in bar activities? Because that's another demand on their time.
I would, but there have been some significant changes that make it a different world for today's young lawyers. Back when we were young lawyers, we weren't carrying around smartphones in our pockets or laptops in our briefcases. We were the whole notion of collegiality was an in-person experience, and so going to a barrister function or going to a Knoxville Bar function or the State Bar Convention, all of that was part of the exchange of information and participation with your colleagues. Now all they do is flip on social media or Zoom, and they collaborate in that manner. So they see less of a need for the organized bar to produce the collegial experience for them. But I think the older they get, the more they will realize that the organized bar will remain in an important place to assist in the proper way for justice to be administered in our country.
So when you were the president of the Knoxville Bar, about how many lawyers did we have in Knoxville?
Around 600.
Did you ever go to the Brass Rail on Friday?
Yes.
Tell people about going to the Brass Rail and whether or not that was a collegial experience for lawyers.
It was, because you would see lawyers there. I actually recall seeing Lou Wolf there quite frequently. Bob Worthington, you'd see him there too.
Both prominent lawyers in Knoxville.
The Young brothers. It was a lawyer's lunch spot.
I once heard that if you needed to engage in a meeting or a conversation with another lawyer in Knoxville, you needed to be at the Brass Rail on Friday. Did you find that to be a true statement?
It was. You always had to pay attention to that. Yes.
Do you recall any special challenges you faced as the KBA president?
Well, not really. I had the good fortune of having a pretty good year. Sarah followed me, and I think she had a pretty good year.
When you say Sarah?
Sarah Shepard. An interesting experience for my year was we did a little retreat or workshop for the board, and we did it at the hotel once known as the Hyatt. And I put together a little program of speakers. Victor came to talk to us.
Victor Ashe.
Victor Ashe.
Longtime mayor of Knoxville and former ambassador to Poland.
Yes, and we could spend the rest of the afternoon talking about Victor.
No doubt.
But one of the speakers that I asked to attend and make a little presentation for us was a fellow who used to be an aide to President Jimmy Carter. And that was Hamilton Jordan, who came to Knoxville to work for Whittle Communications. Chris Whittle was putting together an incredible organization of heavyweights in different fields in order to contribute to his communications company, and Hamilton was one of them. And I got to know him. Lynn, my wife Lynn, was working for Whittle at that time, so I had a little extra access. So I asked Hamilton if he would make a presentation to our board at our retreat in order to explain the status of the world and where we are going as our country, America, is progressing. And I thought, well, what he'll do is he'll come in, he'll tell some interesting war stories. There are plenty. Some of them were reported. I remember one about him sitting in a bar in Georgetown. That was funny. But I thought it would be that sort of exchange. Well, he delivered a gloom and doom, and everybody was just sort of cringing because he came in serious and left serious. And he left, and I thought, wow, I got more than I bargained for. But it was a rare but nice experience.
What did you do then to lighten the mood?
We kept moving.
You were president of the Tennessee Bar Association during the 1995 and 96 years. I think everyone who's recently been elected as a TBA president has a special goal or theme in mind coming into the job. Did you have a special goal or theme in mind?
3.
All right.
While I was vice president, I talked the board into letting me form what we call the Vice President's Advisory Committee, which you may remember. And the purpose of the committee was, from my perspective, and I don't know if I ever said this out loud, but from my perspective, it was I wanted to bring together 10 or 12 of the best lawyers, relatively young, that I could put together and see if we think alike. And then my hope was that I could bring enough enthusiasm to that group of people that the next 10 or 12 years of TBA presidents would come from that group. I probably never said that, but I'll tell it now. The other thing...
That happened, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Thank you, Charles. It did. I feel really, really good about that. Also related to that was theme number 2, encourage more involvement of women in the legal profession, particularly in the organized bar. I think we accomplished that as well. The third one was, and this actually involves a funny story, the third one was, let's see if we can't promote technology in the delivery of member service to TBA members. And so I had met Lee Riggs, who was an IT guru, and I said, Lee, can you help me? And he said, sure. So back then they had this thing where the incoming president would get a stipend to pay the secretary of the president, back in the president's law office, as extra income to cover what the secretary would need to do for her lawyer, usually her lawyer, serving as president of the Tennessee Bar Association. So we're at budget time, and I've had my conversation with Lee Riggs, and I knew I needed some seed money. So I said, okay, we're foregoing this stipend thing, and we're going to put it into technology. And everybody agreed. My secretary never knew, by the way. So we had the seed money to start. The first thing that came was TBA Link, which a version of that still exists.
Tell folks who don't know what TBA Link is, just briefly.
It is an email chain for TBA members, and you can get current legal news. And then we added snippets of opinions from the state court system, and then later from the Sixth Circuit. And a form of that is still there, and I read it every day.
Every day?
Yes, every weekday.
It changed life for a lot of lawyers.
It did. The fellow who was publishing that Tennessee Law Journal in Brentwood was not very happy with us, but there was nothing he could say or do. The other thing that we did with the technology money was Lee quickly put together an online CLE program, and he called it Lawyers Learn. And so we got into the online CLE stuff a whole lot earlier than a lot of state bars around the country. That then led into one of the other missions I had, which was to take these super Tennessee young lawyers and push them into the ABA and let Tennessee have a force and a voice on the national level. And we accomplished that too.
That happened as well, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
So, speaking of moving them into the ABA, you have been amazingly involved in so many capacities with the American Bar Association. You have served both on the ABA House of Delegates and the ABA Board of Governors. You chaired the Committee on Meetings and Travel, which I never got on that committee, and that's the best committee in the world.
It's a great one.
Why is it a great committee?
Well, it could come up later, but it put me in a position to, at some point in the future, be considered for the Airport Authority Board because of my experience with the airline industry, being chair of that ABA committee.
You chaired the task force on outreach to the public. You chaired the Commission on Public Understanding about the law. You chaired the ABA Committee on Scope and Correlation of Work. You served on the Board of Editors of the ABA Journal. That's a big publication. You have served as a member of the Committee on Strategic Communications, a member of the Constitution and Bylaws Committee, a member of the Committee on Governmental Affairs. That's an astounding amount of activity and work that you have invested in that organization and in this profession. Why have you been so active in the ABA?
I made some wonderful friends. That made it easy to participate, made it easy to show up. But it's really about showing up, and it's about giving back. It's just I think it's my nature. Whatever I am fortunate enough to take from this world, I would rather double in what I give. And that's just, my philosophy may be broken, but that's my philosophy.
Maybe that's why you were a philosophy major.
Thank you, Charles.
One more example of the high regard in which you are held by this profession is that you have been selected as a member of the American Law Institute. Can you explain for us, please, what the American Law Institute is and what it does?
The ALI was actually, it's going to celebrate its 100th anniversary next year. And it has been about the business of helping rewrite American law that needs to be rewritten. They're responsible for the Restatement of Laws program, the development of various model codes. It's a collection of lawyers who are interested in those things, plus a lot of professors and deans from law schools around the country. And they have study groups that work on this all the time. And it's really an amazing enterprise and a huge and valuable contribution to our system of justice.
It seems impossible that with all of those activities, your professional activities, your actual work as a mediator and a lawyer, that you've made time for leadership in your church and your community. But I know that you have. You have served as Vice Chancellor of the Episcopal Diocese, still serving as Vice Chancellor of the Episcopal Diocese?
And that's a relatively new thing. And for me, I'll tell a story on my oldest child, Caroline, and her ordination as a priest. After the ordination, I was talking at an event with several friends of mine. Caroline was there, and she overheard me say to my friends, "I'm so happy for Caroline. It's just so wonderful. I'm so glad she's now an ordained priest." I said, for me, it's a little bit like having an insurance policy. And she came over and she said, "Dad, it doesn't work that way." Well, shortly after that, we get a new bishop for our Diocese of East Tennessee, and his name is Brian Cole. And he's a wonderful fella, and I got to know him. He called one day and he said, "Would you have lunch with me?" And I said, "Sure." And so it turns out what he wanted me to do was develop a mediation program for our diocese. And the purpose of it would be for him to send a mediator into a particular parish in Kingsport, Chattanooga, Rugby, Knoxville, wherever that parish might be, that needs some help sorting out things among themselves for whatever those issues might be. And it's in the theory of the church to pursue reconciliation. And so he doesn't really call it mediation, although he's happy to. It is a remedial service where he can send a designee from our panel. So I put together a panel of Knoxville Episcopal Rule 31 mediators.
What a perfect fit.
Yep. And we had a little training program. He attended, and they've been doing some of this. In fact, I've done one church myself. It's a very nice experience. I have no, and should not have any role inside any sort of church service, but it's a different way to participate. So there are many ways to use your faith, and I found one I kind of like.
You're a lucky man.
Yes.
Among the many other civic activities that you've been involved in, I know personally that you've been involved with the Metropolitan Knoxville Airport Authority and served for many years as the chair of the Airport Authority. Tell me how that came about for you and what your experience has been with the Airport Authority.
Margie Nichols, aide to Mayor Haslam, called one day and said, "Howard, would you like to be on the airport board?" And I said, "Well, yes." And I said, "Margie, do you know the story?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, I asked Victor years ago to put me on the airport board, and he didn't, even though Victor is a very good friend." She laughed. She said, "Well, we're going to take care of this." So that's how I got on it. I was actually following Arthur Seymour, so I took his spot. And
Arthur Seymour, a longtime lawyer in Knoxville,
longtime
well
lawyer,
respected,
who unfortunately passed away not too long ago. I wanted to be on it because I had always admired the role of the airport, not only as a business, but as a gateway to our community. It is extraordinarily important, if only for that. People need to come to Tennessee. They need to come to our area for vacation and for business, and the gateway concept is extraordinarily important. I have truly enjoyed my airport board work. I have been so fortunate to be invited to participate by 3 different mayors with a little help from my friends. Someone said to me after India put me up for a 3rd term.
India Kincannon, the current mayor
Our current
of the city
mayor.
of Knoxville.
Someone said, "Howard, 3 mayors, 3 terms, who does that?" And I said, "A lucky man."
Very lucky man. So, Howard, is there anything else you wish I had asked that you would like to tell us?
You have the question of why do you do what you do. You have asked, and that's really it. And I've already alluded to it. No one does anything important without the support of others. Hillary Clinton wrote the book, "It Takes a Village." It's true. In my case, it certainly takes a family and some villagers as well. And that has been my good fortune to have that support. And that is principally because of my wife, Lynn. She didn't always go with me to these ABA meetings across the country, but she never complained. She knew that it was important to me, and she could see that participating in that manner to support the legal profession and the delivery of justice in our country is something somebody's got to do. And if Howard can do a little bit of that, that's fine. So I don't know what the question would have been to necessarily generate that answer, but there it is.
No one better suited. Howard, we in the Knoxville Bar hope that these interviews will be preserved and shared with lawyers in the future to give them a sense of where they came from. And it has been my real honor to interview you. So when these folks in the future consider Howard Vogel and Howard Vogel's career, how would you like for them to remember you?
I don't know that they need to, but for those who stumble across me, let me say just a couple of things as we close. I am a fan of music. I like lots of different forms of music. Maybe not rap so much, but a little classical music sometimes enthuses my patriotism, something like the 1812 Overture. Every once in a while, a little Alan Jackson or Dwight Yoakam might help a cold beer taste better. Sometimes my faith needs to have the feeling of some Southern gospel music. Months ago, I was asked to make some remarks at the funeral of a very close friend, a lawyer from Jackson, Mississippi. And he became my friend because of the American Bar Association. We met in the late 70s at an ABA convention in New York. And he became a dear friend, and he was here frequently over the years. We used to do what we called the Big Orange Weekend. Even though he was an Ole Miss fan, he would still put up with wearing a little bit of orange on a football weekend in Knoxville. Now that's a friend. But Steve passed away, and his widow asked me to make some remarks, so I did. And in closing those remarks, I borrowed from the lyrics of the country music singer and songwriter Vince Gill, whom I admire. I think he's very, very good. And he, the lyrics, I'll butcher them, but the refrain is something like, "Go rest high on that mountain. Your time on earth is done." Charles, someday someone will say something like that about both you and me. And what I would ask as we close that they do is, as they walk and climb those mountains, I hope they can do it in peace and with great purpose.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Charles.